World War I was, at the time, the most destructive war in all human history, involving millions of soldiers from dozens of countries around the world. It was called the Great War because of its enormous scope. It introduced the world to the concepts of total war, daylight savings, and universal suffrage. How then did it begin? This is Europe today. As you can see, in 1914 it looked quite different. Back then, continental Europe was dominated by France, Germany, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Russia. Britain, because of her large navy and colonial empire, was also a major power. Until the 1860s, Germany had been little more than a loose collection of states. Between 1864 and 1871, the largest of these states, Prussia, fought and won 3 wars to bring the rest of Germany under her control. In the last of these wars, Prussia defeated France and seized the French provinces of Alsace and Lorraine. The chancellor of the newly formed German nation, Otto von Bismarck, knew that France would seek revenge for the loss of Alsace-Lorraine. If France could ally itself with a powerful neighbor, such as Austria or Russia, Germany's very existence might come under threat. To stop this from happening, Bismarck established a network of alliances with all the mainland powers of Europe except France. At the same time, he worked hard to maintain good relations with Britain. France was isolated and therefore powerless. Wilhelm II became Kaiser in 1888, and in 1890 he forced Bismarck to resign. Days later, he let Germany's treaty with Russia lapse. Russia and France were now alone in Europe against an alliance of Germany, Austria, and Italy. They were understandably nervous, so in 1894 they signed the Double Entente, in which they promised to fight side by side if either was attacked by Germany. They also agreed to mobilize their forces if any of the Triple Alliance forces mobilized theirs. France's isolation had ended, and 5 of Europe's great powers were now split into 2 rival camps: the Triple Alliance, made up of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, and the Double Entente of Russia and France. A dispute between any 2 of these powers had the potential to draw in the other 3. For 40 years, Britain had tried to keep out of European affairs in a policy called splendid isolation. When France and Russia, Britain's 2 major colonial rivals, signed the Double Entente, Britain decided to patch up some of her differences with her traditional enemy, France. In 1904, the Entente Cordiale was signed. In it, France agreed to British control of Egypt, while Britain agreed to French control over Morocco. It was not a military alliance. However, the Germans, who had wanted to sign their own alliance with Britain, behaved as if it was an anti-German agreement and tried to break it up. In 1905, the German Kaiser paid a visit to Morocco and declared that Morocco should be independent of France. Germany hoped that in the ensuing crisis, Britain would refuse to back France and the Entente would collapse. At a conference to solve the crisis, Germany threatened war. Britain and France called Germany's bluff, and the Entente was hardened. The conference also exposed a weakness in the Triple Alliance when Italy deserted Germany and backed France. From now on, the Germans would argue that Austria was their only true ally. When Wilhelm II came to power in 1888, Britain, Russia, and France all had large colonial empires. He wanted Germany to be a world power with a large empire as well, to have a place in the sun. With a large empire, Germany would have access to raw materials and new markets, as well as added respect and prestige. Germany's bid for colonial greatness was doomed from the start. She had started too late in the race for colonies. All that was left were some less significant tracts in Africa, a few islands in the Pacific, and parts of China. This quest for an empire brought Germany into conflict with the other major powers. In 1911, French troops were sent to Morocco to help the Sultan's government and, at the same time, strengthen France's position. They occupied the capital Fez, and the German government thought that France would take over the entire country. Germany responded by sending a gunboat, the Panther, to Morocco, with demands that in exchange for allowing France a free hand in Morocco, Germany should be given the whole of the French Congo in Central Africa as compensation. The British government was alarmed. They saw the incident as a threat to the Entente and were angry at their exclusion from negotiations. Britain's fleet even prepared for war. Germany backed down, accepting 2 strips of territory in the French Congo, far less than they originally demanded. For Germany, this was a humiliating diplomatic defeat and increased the perception within Germany that she was being encircled by unfriendly powers. The Secretary of the German Navy, Admiral Tirpitz, used the crisis to pass a law to enlarge the German Navy. Britain followed suit and strengthened her military ties with France. The Anglo-French Entente had become almost a military alliance. Towards the end of the 19th century, a warped kind of Darwinism was applied to nations and empires. A commonly held view at the time was that in the future, strong nations would flourish, while weak nations would be crushed. A strong army became a necessity, and war was considered by all the major powers as a viable policy option in order to gain or maintain superiority. Britain needed a large navy to protect her colonies and trade routes. In 1893, she had adopted a policy called the two-power standard. This meant that the British fleet should be equal to any 2 navies in the world put together. If Germany wanted to have a large empire, she needed a large navy. So, through a series of new laws, the Secretary of the German Navy, Tirpitz, began to turn the German Navy from a coastal protection force into a battle fleet. In 1906, the British Navy launched the HMS Dreadnought, a new type of battleship that could outgun any battleship afloat. Germany started to build its own fleet of dreadnoughts, so Britain sped up her shipbuilding program. The naval race had begun. This naval buildup was part of a general arms race. Between 1870 and 1914, Military spending by the European powers increased by a massive 300%, and conscription was adopted by all the continental powers from 1871. By 1914, more than 12 million men could be called into action in the event of war. Readying an army for war is a big operation. Troops have to be organized into fighting units and provided with weapons, clothing, and rations. Then, they have to be transported to the front line as quickly as possible. This process is called mobilization. The faster a nation mobilized, the greater the chance of success in a conflict. The army that mobilized first might even deliver a knockout blow to the enemy before they were ready. Germany had the best railway network in Europe, and they planned to use it to move large numbers of troops quickly in the event of war. Germany thought that war with France would be inevitable. France wanted revenge for the loss of Alsace-Lorraine. The Franco-Russian Entente meant that in the event of war, Russia would probably support France. The German Chief of Staff, Count von Schlieffen, did not think that Germany was strong enough to fight both France and Russia at the same time. Estimating that it would take 6 weeks for Russia to mobilize, Schlieffen devised a plan where Germany would crush France first, then move to the Eastern Front to take on Russia. To defeat France quickly, Schlieffen planned to avoid the heavily fortified French-German border by invading through Belgium. The German armies would then turn in a massive hammer swing and encircle Paris. The plan, however, had several major flaws. First of all, it called for the invasion of two neighboring countries, Belgium and Luxembourg, as well as France. Once the order to mobilize was issued, war would inevitably follow. Secondly, the plan could not be changed. The railways were too inflexible. In order to move 2 million men to the front quickly, thousands of trains had to be synchronized. To change the plan meant revising the train timetables, which would take at least 6 months. Thirdly, by invading Belgium, Germany risked bringing Britain into the war. Britain had earlier signed a treaty guaranteeing Belgium's independence. Finally, there was no plan for a war with Russia only. In the event of a war between Germany and Russia, Germany had to invade France. Within the Austro-Hungarian Empire, there were Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Ruthenians, Serbs, Croats, Slovenes, and Italians. Less than 50% of her 50 million people were Austrian or Hungarian. Of the ethnic groups, the Slavs were the most restless. They wanted to join up with Serbia to form a united Slavic kingdom. Thus, Austria viewed Serbia as a threat. Located at the junction of Europe and Asia, the Balkans were known as the powder keg of Europe. 3 empires, Turkey, Russia, and Austria-Hungary, all had interests in the area. Combined with the insurgent nationalism of the Slavs, it seemed that one minor incident could lead to war. Turkey had once ruled over all of the Balkans, but as its empire weakened, the Serbs, Greeks, and Bulgars had established their own nations. Russia was also interested in the Balkans. She wanted an outlet to the Mediterranean. She sided with the Slavs on the basis of their common Orthodox religion and was allied with Serbia. In 1908, Austria annexed the provinces of Bosnia and Herzegovina, further fueling Slav nationalism in the process. In 1912, Serbia, Greece, Bulgaria, and Montenegro formed an alliance called the Balkan League. The League used its combined strength to attack Turkey, and in 7 weeks drove her almost completely out of Europe. Austria watched on as Serbia almost doubled in size. Relationships between Austria-Hungary and Serbia deteriorated rapidly after the Balkan Wars. The kings of Serbia and Montenegro considered uniting to form a Yugoslavia. The Serbian press called for a united Slavic nation that would liberate the Slavs living under Austrian rule. Austrian generals called for a quick war to crush Serbia. In June 1914, the Austrians decided to reassert their authority in the Balkans by conducting army maneuvers in Bosnia, an area that was showing too great a fondness for Serbia. To add impact to this display of force, the Inspector General of the forces and heir to the Austrian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, would attend. He and his wife were assassinated in Sarajevo, Bosnia's capital, by a Serbian terrorist, Gavrilo Princip. Princip belonged to a Serbian secret society called the Black Hand. Serbia's chief of army intelligence was its leader. The Austrians now had an excuse to go to war with Serbia. First of all, however, they needed to be sure that Germany would come to their aid if Russia backed Serbia. Germany did not want to lose her only ally, so on the 5th of July, the Kaiser and the German Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg gave Austria a blank check. They agreed to support Austria if Russia intervened. On the 24th of July, almost 1 month after the assassination, Austria delivered to Serbia an extremely harsh ultimatum. The Serbs had 48 hours to reply. The Serbs accepted all of the demands except one, which called for an Austrian-led inquiry into Serbian participation in the assassination. This was not good enough for Austria. The British Prime Minister, Sir Edward Grey, called for a conference between the great powers to settle the dispute, but Germany refused to take part. On the 28th of July, Austria declared war on Serbia. The next day, shells bombarded the Serbian capital, Belgrade. Russia now moved to support her ally, Serbia. On the 30th of July, the Tsar ordered Russia's army to mobilize along her entire border. The German government was alarmed. The Schlieffen Plan, based on the theory that it would take Russia 6 weeks to mobilize, meant that Germany had to counter with immediate mobilization. Time was of the essence if Germany hoped to avoid a war on two fronts. So, on the 31st of July, Germany issued an ultimatum to Russia, giving them 12 hours to demobilize. Germany also issued an ultimatum to France, giving them 18 hours to declare their neutrality in the event of a war between Germany and Russia. On the 1st of August, when the ultimatum to Russia expired, Germany declared war and began to mobilize. The wheels of the Schlieffen Plan were set in motion. France rejected Germany's ultimatum and commenced mobilization. The next day, Germany invaded Luxembourg and fired off an ultimatum to Belgium, demanding the right to send troops through the country to attack France. Any breach of Belgium's neutrality was likely to draw Britain into the war. Britain was a signatory of the 1839 Treaty of London, which guaranteed Belgian independence. Also, Britain was unlikely to allow Germany to dominate continental Europe. On the 3rd of August, Belgium rejected Germany's ultimatum, and Germany invaded. The next day, Britain sent her own ultimatum to Germany. If Germany did not call off her invasion of Belgium within 5 hours, she would sever all diplomatic relations. When the ultimatum expired at midnight, Britain declared war on Germany. The First World War had begun.